when you look at the Constitution of Kenya, Article 4 declares that Kenya is a constitutional democracy. A constitutional democracy, and I will tie it up with the budget, implies and means several things. First of all, it means that the people are sovereign. If you are making the budget, you are making a budget for the people, and for the ultimate benefit of the people. Number two, in a constitutional democracy, it means that all state and public officials exercise limited power. And by limited power, it means, for example, that when it comes to the issues of taxation, you cannot make a budget and you cannot propose tax measures in which you are effectively assuming that the government of Kenya is the beneficial owner of the money that people earn. You must actually respect that. Cyprian has earned a salary of 100,000, and you must peg yourself to what is reasonable to take. In previous governments, we had situations whereby there was probably a discussion at the cabinet level. Are we going to take 20 or 25 or 15? And that is a moral restraint. But these moral restraints have disappeared. We have a government that for the first time does not have any moral or ethical restraint to take 60% of the money that you earn. And that is why you can no longer be a constitutional democracy, because in a constitutional democracy you realize you exercise limited power and this is not your money. And people cannot give all their money to you to run KK programs or anything else under the sun. The third thing that it means is that in a constitutional democracy, the legitimacy of government and its officials depends on their fidelity to the Constitution and their willingness and capacity to work for the people and assist the people to realize economic prosperity. Now, when you measure, and that is now the preamble to my discussion, when you measure how the constitutional democracy in Kenya is being run over the few years that have been there, it is very difficult to say that Kenya is actually a practicing constitutional democracy based on those broad standards. Now, there are 5 issues that for purposes of the Finance Bill 2024 that I've identified for purposes of highlighting or on behalf of our meeting. The first issue is what we call that the Finance Bill 2024 negates and undermines the capitalist economic system and free enterprise. What's the point here? Article 40 of the Constitution provides that the right to property. For those who are very rich, your business, your property is a major property that is protected by the Constitution. But also your income and those who have royalties and patents and everything else, those are also forms of properties that are protected by the Constitution of Kenya. The idea in a capitalist system is this, that you recognize that as a capitalist nation, wealth creation is through free enterprise. The people are supposed to create wealth, not the government. And number 2, in creating wealth, you must realize that the people must keep as much of their money as possible in order to be able to finance their economic projects. And therefore, in a capitalist state, and that's why it's a big issue in America and in the West, how much of taxes are you going to demand from us is argument number 1. So that because in a capitalist system, you take your children to school, you finance your family, then you can only finance this through own resources. And therefore, it becomes the responsibility of government and recognizes as an important principle of capitalism that it is my money, it is my property. You cannot overtax my property. If I buy a car and I've already paid VAT, I've already paid customs duty, and I pay the fuel levy, you cannot talk about circulation, another money that you'll be charging me to keep my vehicle on the road, because this is a wealth tax. You will effectively be punishing me for, and that goes against Article 40 of the Constitution, which are put there in order to protect the capitalist system of production and the free enterprise, in which, if ever this country is going to be rich, it will only be rich because Kenyans are rich. And it is something you need to know about America. Why is America the richest country in the world? Because if you take a list of 1 million people who are richest in this world, you would find that half a million of them are most likely to be Americans. And that's why you say America is rich. But you cannot be rich by saying the government of Kenya, and in this case meaning the president and a few people, collect all the money and decide how this money is going to be expended. This is a hallmark of a poor country. Because in a poor country, everybody is poor. And that is the first mark. If a finance bill, the effect of it is not to suggest measures and make proposals that at the end of the day facilitate the prosperity of the citizens, then it is a failure at that basic score from a capitalist point of view. I'll not elaborate a lot of this because we do not have time. Point number 2 is what we are calling the government is asserting unlimited power and right to tax citizens. I think I've referred to that. Article 201 of the Constitution says that taxation must be sustainable. That in taxing people, you must ensure that they have something to live. You cannot tax people to an extent that parents are asking themselves, because a few years ago the choice was, how many beers am I going to sacrifice in order to finance the government? Now the issue is once again becoming, I will be sick, but I may not go to hospital. I may not take insurance. This is where we are going. You wanted to take your children to Kianda. The choice now is becoming, you may not even take your children to Kianda, they may have to go back to Moi complex in Kibera. These are not choices that are fair. Because if you make enough money to be able to finance your livelihoods to a good standard, without requiring to come from Kileleshwa to go to Dandora, where you thought you had come from a few years ago, then there is something seriously wrong with it. And that is the whole idea. Article 201 sets out the principles that are supposed to limit government and the manner in which you are supposed to carry out the taxation. The limits and the principles set out in Article 201 are being violated over and over both in the last Finance Act and the current Finance Bill. And that must be the basis in examining the constitutionality of what we are talking about. And in saying all this, we have cited in the paper what Margaret Thatcher, the champion of capitalism, said. And she said this: prosperity will not come by inventing more and more lavish expenditure programs. You do not grow richer by ordering another checkbook from the bank. No nation ever grew more prosperous by taxing its citizens beyond their capacity to pay. In Kenya, we are reaching that point where government, despite reaching the point where we can no longer afford these taxes, it is continuing to lump more and more taxes without any care whatsoever, and with recognition that members of parliament, because they would end up being told this money is paying for CDF, for women's fund, and all these kind of things, they just keep passing everything as cheap, and end up the people of Kenya effectively are being impoverished once again. Because people, and I've met, these are personal friends, people who we used to recognize recently as members of the middle class are going to become proletariats once again. They are going to become ordinary people who have come from where we thought that they had come when they were fresh university graduates. So it's a serious scandal that is taking place in this country. Now, the third issue is what we call the gross abuse of parliamentary powers to tax and raise revenue. What's this? The finance bill, and Moshere has talked about it, these are laws that are supposed to deal with financial matters, raising revenue, saying how this is going to come and from where. We don't have to repeat that. But you have seen that over the years, the Finance Act are used as laws. For example, now through a Finance Act is legitimate to say VAT Act, Income Tax Act, Customs Duty Act, and all these laws are going to be changed in this way or the other. But we are going now beyond that. That, for example, when in the current finance bill, there is an amendment that has been proposed to the Data Protection Act. The Data Protection Act cannot be amended through the finance bill because the purpose of this law has nothing to do with finance. This law has to be viewed as a law that was made in order to protect the right to privacy under Article 35 of the Constitution. And laws that are made, they are actually supposed to be processed under Article 24, where there is a criteria that is set out. What is a proper law that is supposed to be made to govern a specific area? You are aware, for those who have read the Constitution, that they are actually a completely different area where you deal with laws that relates to money bills, as they call them, and they set out the procedure. So that there is a distinction that is created by the Constitution. And you see, like, when on a serious issue you put it in the Finance Act, now people are going to say, oh, you are dealing with this particular issue in a very serious manner. Okay, what they are complaining about, for example, the affordable housing bill. So you end up even not receiving a memorandum to do with the amendment to the data protections bill. And therefore, what is it that we are saying? We are saying that this abuse is taking the form of where finance bills are encroaching on a territory that they are supposed to limit. They are making a mockery of Article 24 of the Constitution that protects and provides for how, in a constitutional democracy, laws are supposed to be passed. There is this Motor Vehicle Circulations Act. This has nothing to do with income. You cannot introduce it through income tax, but they are introducing it through income, through an amendment to the income tax. But what is it in particular? This is a wealth tax. And if you want to tax wealth, which is actually prohibited in a capitalist society, then you must actually say, we are going socialist. And because in a socialist country, it's legitimate that you can tax wealth in order to finance the poor or the hustler or anybody else who is your political ally. But constitutionally, this is something we need fair debate. You must actually present that bill. And we see, would this require a constitutional amendment? What is its constitutional basis? If there is none, or if there is a constitutional basis, then we must say, does the Constitution allow for this to happen? So that effectively the point is, the finance bills are being abused. In matters that should not be in the finance bill are being introduced into the finance bill so that you can circumvent the law, so that you can be able to ensure that you are not answerable to the people, that public debate on laws is not effective. This is illegitimate, and these are serious violations. We go to the next issue, what I call the surrender of Kenya's sovereignty to the International Monetary Fund. This is a very, very serious issue. Because what is it that is happening? Let me explain politically. Politically, what is happening is this. You need to be in the good books of IMF. So you go to the IMF and you agree anything that you want the so-called balancing of the accounts or books, I'll be able to do. So the IMF, being IMF and SARS, they tell you, oh, your people, despite the fact that they're already very poor, tax them, do everything under the sun. So you get all this long inventory, this long list of laws that are coming from IMF. And then you agree with them that you are going to give me some loans, which we do not know, as Moshere has said, how they are spent, in return for you giving me a proposal on how these loans are going to be paid. So how does this proposal go? You agree behind the scenes with IMF that I'm going to do this and this and this and this. Now, how does this now manifest itself? Because of a meeting at Treasury or at State House between IMF and representatives of the government of Kenya, they have already agreed that these taxes are going to be introduced in Kenya. And having agreed these taxes are going to be introduced in Kenya, then every MP must be sheep. Because effectively, and the president said the last time, you cannot change a comma. You cannot do this or the other. And actually, and you get judges, you get the High Court to agree that the bill is okay. So when you get the president threatening MPs that there is no comma that is going to be changed, when you get the High Court actually adding more money to the government and changing nothing else in the Finance Bill 2023, it all comes from a single issue, that the President of Kenya, on behalf of Kenya, has committed that we are going to pass this thing as it is. So what is this surrender of Kenya's sovereignty? The constitutional democracy in Kenya assumes that our MPs are not sheep. The constitutions of Kenya presupposes that the president of Kenya will address himself to the needs of the Kenyan people and is answerable to them. But the truth is, the president of Kenya is answerable primarily to IMF and secondly to the United States of America. It's the truth of God, however much you want to run away from it. And this to me is the grossest perversion of our constitutional democracy that you can ever imagine. The ultimate surrender of our sovereignty. In the paper, you've seen, I'm not creating all these things. Jaindi Kisero is a respectable business and economics writer. He has said, all these things that now you are seeing in the finance bill are actually in the IMF website, that we had agreed to do all these things with the government of Kenya. Therefore, if the main mark and Vladimir Putin is right here, you can either be a sovereign state or somebody's dependent or somebody's satellite. To the question, is the Kenyan government sovereign anymore? As a constitutional lawyer, the answer is no. Because the most important sovereignty, even in a house, and the source of authority in your own house, I pay house rent, I buy food in that house, I educate the children. So, mimi ndio mzee wa nyumba, isn't it? But if our President William Ruto sio mzee wa nyumba yetu Kenya, then we cannot be a sovereign state in any serious sense of the word, okay? I go to the next issue. This is a long subject, we need to discuss it when we have more time. The next issue is what we are calling the diminished capacity of the Kenyan government and its capacity to provide viable solutions to the economic challenges facing Kenya. Let's face it. Where the KK government inherited a lot of problems. There is no doubt about that. But from the way we even run our families, we run them this way. If there is a very serious issue affecting the larger family of Mwaura's group, you would have people asking, and is some Mwaura aware? Because we expect that all problems, depending on their size, must have a person who can be able to address them because of their capacity, correct? Even when you have, I'm a lawyer, even when you have a legal issue, you would ask, people are asking themselves, oh, this looks like a serious issue. Who is your lawyer? And the people want to ensure that you have the kind of lawyer who is equal to the task. Okay? So the question also must be asked with regard to our country. Is the president, his cabinet, and members of parliament equal to the task of addressing the problems facing our country today? Because when we were doing the campaigns, the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, had done so many things. Some of them fraudulently, some of them with projects that we see, and all these kind of things. There were things he did. Because we could see those things, we always used to say, oh, Uhuru is a drunkard, Uhuru doesn't work, it is Ruto who works, correct? Now, and we ended up during the campaigns to say, the deputy president is a genius. But now that 2 years down the line he is there, and everything seems not to be working, we can only say, this man was never genius. And we can also say, if anything could happen during Kenyatta's time, it happened despite of him, in spite of him, not because of him. And therefore, we start by taking away the illusions that the president of Kenya is not a genius. We go to the second question. Who has he appointed as cabinet secretaries and PSs to help him run the country? Again, average people, people with fake degrees, people with unknown backgrounds, people who have never done themselves to anything. So that to the question, are the affairs of this country in the custody of safe and capable hands? The answer again becomes no. And that's a serious issue. Because if the person supposed to address the problem does not even know it, okay? Number two, does not have the right intentions for his country. Because if you have the right intentions for this country, then the legal theft that Moshere is talking about will not be taking place, as a primary issue. And number two, assuming somebody told you all these things are serious, do you have the imagination? Do you have the capacity, like we saw with Kibaki, to say it is possible to actually come up with policies that can enable the people to prosper and to become a little bit rich so that you can actually tax people who have already have something to be taxed? But now you are having a situation where to people who are already poor, you are subjecting them to scorched earth policy. A policy whereby you say, you are addressing these things, unakuja unafieka kila kitu, and now until businesses collapse, and next year the question is going to be, what are you going to tax? The tax measures of 2023, we saw as of March, is it 31st of March, it was lagging behind by 270 billion. It is obvious that we will not raise enough taxes. Going to the next year, apart from being a lawyer where I run a few businesses, I am aware of so many businesses that are closing every day, okay? So the tax base is narrowing. But when you keep doing crazy things and saying you're expanding the tax base, the big questions becomes, if you have a group that does not understand basic economic theories, then what are you doing in the office? And I think to me, why do I raise that? I do not raise it for any political reason. I raise them in order that you do not leave here saying that the problem is with some accounting theory about the budget. No, it is a fundamental issue that you are dealing with. Finally, as I conclude, is to say one thing. What is this I want to say? A country progresses or fails to progress depending on the choices of its chief leader. The chief leader in Kenya, we call him president, okay? So, if Kenya is going to get anywhere, then it depends on what choices does the president make about taxation, about investment, about enriching the people of Kenya. Those are choices that must be made. For Singapore to be Singapore, there was Lee Kuan Yew. I am completing. For this other guy, South Korea, to be where it was, there was this general who ensured Korea got where he was. When you go to Dubai, Dubai is different from Syria because of the capacity of the Emir of Dubai or United Arab Emirates. So that the point that I am making is that going forward, we must have no illusions that the people who decide matters of life and death must be examined on two issues: good intentions, amongst them patriotism for the country; 2, capacity to do his job; and 3, capacity to ensure that you have a team that can actually be able to do a job. But if that is not happening, I can assure you, this year, we are discussing a law that is worse than the previous one. If you look at the IMF website, you can be sure the budget for 2025-2026 would even be more crazy and more worse than what we are dealing with. And therefore, what's my point? We must address the true problems facing this country without illusions. Thank you very much.